The leather whip cracked against Clara Thornfield's back for the third time, and this time she couldn't swallow the cry that tore from her throat like a wounded bird taking flight. You can almost taste the dust that hung in the air of Dustrocks. Main Street that scorching Tuesday afternoon, thick as grief and twice as bitter. The entire town had gathered, shopkeepers abandoning their counters, children pressed against their mothers' skirts, even the saloon girls peering from behind painted shutters. All of them watching as Judge Cornelius Blackwood's hired man brought down punishment on a woman whose only crime was existing in a world that had no mercy for the desperate. "Please," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. Her 5-year-old son Tommy clung to her torn skirts, his face buried against her hip, small shoulders shaking with each sob. "My boy, he's just hungry." The whipmaster, a scarred brute named Silas Crane, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Judge says you stole bread from Morrison's store. Says you ain't paid rent on that shack you're squatting in for nigh on 3 months." He raised the whip again, leather singing through the dry air. Clara closed her eyes, waiting for the fourth strike that would surely drop her to her knees in front of these people who watched her humiliation like it was Sunday entertainment. Her husband Samuel had been dead 8 months now. Took a bullet meant for another man in a saloon fight that had nothing to do with him. Left her with a boy to feed and winter coming on fierce. She'd tried everything, taking in washing, mending, clothes by candlelight until her fingers bled, even begging. But Dustrock was a town that ate the weak, and she was nothing but gristle and bone now. The whip never fell. "That's enough." The voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade through silk. Low, measured, carrying the kind of authority that made grown men step back without thinking. Clara's eyes snapped open to see a figure emerging from the crowd, tall and lean as a lodgepole pine, wearing a black duster that had seen 1,000 miles of hard country. His hat sat low over his eyes, but she could see the line of his jaw, strong and clean-shaven, and the way his hand rested easy on the grip of his Colt. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Silas growled, but his voice had lost its edge. Something about this man made even the brutal overseer hesitate. The stranger stepped closer, his boots silent on the packed earth despite the spurs that glinted silver at his heels. When he spoke again, his words carried the soft drawl of Texas, smooth as aged whiskey. "See, that's where you're wrong." He reached Clara in 3 long strides, his presence suddenly warm at her side like a shield against the watching eyes. "This woman happens to be my wife." The crowd's murmur died to dead silence. Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet, confusion and hope warring in her chest like 2 wildcats in a sack. Tommy peered up from her skirts, his tear-streaked face, curious despite his fear. "Your wife." Judge Blackwood pushed through the crowd, his round face flushed red as a turkey's wattle. "Now see here, I know every person in this town, and this woman ain't married to nobody. Her husband's been dead near a year." The stranger's smile was thin as a knife blade. "Been away on business. Long business." He reached into his duster and withdrew a folded paper, yellowed with age and travel. "Marriage certificate, signed and witnessed in San Antonio, Texas. Clara May Thornfield, now Clara May Dalton." His eyes met hers for the first time, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not love, but a promise of protection that felt solid as bedrock. "Ain't that right, darling?" Clara's mouth moved soundlessly. This man was a stranger, someone she'd never laid eyes on before this moment. Yet he stood there claiming her as his own like she was something precious he'd lost and finally found again. The smart thing would be to call him a liar, to expose whatever game he was playing. But Tommy's small hand gripped her skirt tighter, and she could still feel the fire across her back where the whip had kissed her skin. She began, then stopped. Met his eyes again, saw the slight nod he gave her, encouraging as spring rain. Yes, that's right." Judge Blackwood snatched the paper from the stranger's hands, his beady eyes scanning the document. His face grew redder with each line he read. This appears to be in order, but nothing." The stranger's voice never rose above that dangerous whisper, yet it seemed to fill the entire street. "Now, I understand there's been some confusion about property and debts while I was away. How much does my wife owe?" $17 for rent, the judge sputtered. 3 for the bread. And there's the matter of the public disturbance, $25. The stranger reached into his vest and withdrew a small leather pouch, coins clinking softly inside. That should settle it. He counted out the money into Blackwood's sweaty palm, each silver dollar ringing against the next like tiny bells. The crowd watched in fascination, probably more money than most of them had seen at one time. Now then, the stranger said, straightening to his full height. His hand found the small of Clara's back, steadying her. I believe my family and I have some catching up to do. But as they turned to leave, Clara caught sight of something that made her blood run cold as creek water. There, at the edge of the crowd, stood a man in a fine gray suit, his pale eyes fixed on the stranger with recognition that looked sharp as broken glass. And that man was reaching slowly for the gun beneath his jacket. The stranger's hand tightened imperceptibly on Clara's back as they walked away from the dispersing crowd. His body coiled like a spring wound too tight. She felt rather than saw his awareness of the man in the gray suit. The way his stride never faltered, but his breathing changed, shallow and controlled. "Mama," Tommy whispered, his small fingers still clutched in her torn dress. "Who is that man?" Before Clara could answer, the stranger knelt down beside her son, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Up close, she could see his face clearly for the first time, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard living, but kind eyes, the color of winter sage. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, white against his tanned skin. "Name's Jake Dalton, son, and you must be Tommy." His voice gentled when he spoke to the child, losing that dangerous edge it had carried with the crowd. "Your mama and I, well, we got some talking to do. But right now I need you to be brave for her. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded solemnly, the way children do when they sense the weight of adult troubles pressing down around them. "Good boy." Jake stood, his hand finding Clara's elbow. "We need to get off this street." Now, they walked quickly toward the ramshackle boarding house where Clara had been staying, Jake's presence beside her both comforting and terrifying. The man who'd saved her was clearly dangerous. You didn't carry yourself like that, didn't have that kind of quiet authority without having killed before. But he'd also just spent $25 to buy her freedom, more money than she'd seen in months. "Why?" she asked when they reached the narrow alley beside Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. "Why did you do that?" Jake glanced back toward the main street, his jaw tight. "Because no woman deserves what they were doing to you. And because—" he paused, seemed to weigh his words carefully. "Because I've got reasons for needing a wife in this town. Reasons that might keep us both alive if we play this right." "Alive?" Clara's heart stuttered. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Before he could answer, a voice called out from the mouth of the alley, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Well, Jake Dalton. Heard you were dead." The man in the gray suit stepped into view, his pale eyes bright with malicious pleasure. He was handsome in a cold way, with silver-threaded hair and manicured hands that rested easy on his pearl-handled revolvers. Everything about him screamed money and refined cruelty. Disappointed Vance. Jake didn't turn around, but Clara felt the change in him, like watching a wolf scent danger on the wind. Oh, not at all. Surprised, perhaps. "Last I heard, you'd taken a tumble off Devil's Canyon trying to escape my boys." Vance Murdoch. Clara recognized him now, the territorial governor's right hand, the man who owned half the judges and all the sheriffs between. "Here in Santa Fe. Imagine my delight to find you here, playing house with some common woman." Tommy pressed closer to Clara's side, sensing the menace in the man's voice even if he didn't understand the words. She wrapped her arms around her son, her mind racing. Whatever Jake had done, whoever he really was, he'd tied her to his fate the moment he'd claimed her as his wife. "Vance." Jake finally turned, his hand hovering near his gun. "Still hiding behind bought law and hired killers, I see." Murdoch's laugh was like glass breaking. "Oh, Jake, always so self-righteous. Tell me, does your new bride know about the Esperanza job? Does she know how many good men died because of your conscience?" "So what's your point, Silas?" "Point is, your wife's a liar and a cheat, just like you. Which makes this whole arrangement a lot simpler." Crane's voice hardened. "Mr. Murdoch's prepared to make you both an offer." Clara heard footsteps on the stairs, more men arriving. "How many guns did Murdoch have in this town?" "I'm listening," Jake said. You do the Silver Creek job like he asked. Clean, professional, no heroes. In return, he makes sure the law overlooks certain inconsistencies about your marriage. Might even help your wife with those debts she's running from. And if I refuse? Crane's chuckle was ugly as a buzzard's call. Well, let's just say Mrs. Patterson here has been very cooperative about telling us the layout of this building, including which room has the weakest door. Clara's blood turned to ice. They were threatening Tommy, using her son as leverage against Jake. She looked down at the boy in her arms, his trusting eyes wide with fear, and felt something harden in her chest like cooling steel. Of course, there is another option, Crane continued. Mr. Murdoch's always got use for a woman with your wife's particular skills. Good with numbers, he heard. Organized. Discreet. Might be willing to take her off your hands permanent like. If you prefer to handle your debts the old-fashioned way. The silence that followed was so complete Clara could hear her own heartbeat. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was soft as velvet and twice as dangerous. Silas, I want you to listen. Very carefully. You ever threaten my family again, and I'll gut you like a fish and leave you for the coyotes. Are we clear? Your family. Crane laughed. Jake, she ain't really your wife. The boy ain't your son. This whole thing's just another one of your cons, and we all know it. Maybe. But here's the thing about cons, Silas. Sometimes you end up believing your own story. Clara felt her throat tighten at the words. Was Jake saying he cared about them? Or was this just another layer of deception, another move in whatever game he was playing with Murdoch? Touching, Crane said. But Mr. Murdoch's patience has limits. You've got until sunrise to decide. Do the job, or we start collecting other ways. Starting with the boy. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a prairie fire. Clara heard Jake take a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, resigned, defeated. All right, I'll do it. Smart man. Mr. Murdoch will be pleased. But I want guarantees. Written guarantees that Clara and Tommy are left alone, no matter what happens. You ain't in a position to make demands, Jake. Are not. Something in. Jake's tone made Clara press her ear harder against the door. See, the thing about that government gold everyone's so interested in? I lied about spending it. Clara's heart stopped. The gold. He'd lied to Murdoch about not having it. What? Oh, I spent some of it getting out of Mexico, sure. But 50,000 in gold coins? That's a lot of money to carry around. Man would need somewhere safe to hide it. Jake paused, and Clara could imagine his dangerous smile. Somewhere only he would know about. You son of a bitch. Where is it? That's my insurance policy, Silas. I do this job for Vance. My family stays safe, and everyone gets what they want. But if anything happens to Clara or Tommy, anything at all, that gold disappears forever. And Vance knows I'm stubborn enough to take its location to my grave just to spite him. The hallway fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the creak of floorboards as men shifted their weight. Clara realized she was holding her breath, waiting for Crane's response. Mr. Murdoch ain't gonna like this. Mr. Murdoch's gonna love it, because he's finally getting what he wants. Just on my terms instead of his. More footsteps on the stairs, this time coming down. A new voice, smooth and cultured, Murdoch himself. Having trouble closing this deal. Silas. Sir, he's got conditions, I heard. Murdoch's voice was amused. Jake always was the smartest one in our little organization. Very well, Mr. Dalton. You have your guarantees. But understand, this is the last time I accommodate your conscience. After Silver Creek, your debt is paid, but so is our association. Cross me again, and there won't be enough left of your family to bury. Understood. Excellent. You leave at dawn. My men will escort you to ensure there are no complications. Clara heard the sound of boots retreating down the hallway, then Jake's quiet knock on the door. She opened it to find him standing alone, his face haggard with exhaustion and something else, something that looked almost like relief. It's done, he said simply. But as she looked into his eyes, Clara saw the truth he hadn't spoken aloud. Jake Dalton was riding out to rob a bank for Vance Murdoch, risking his life and his soul to protect her and Tommy, and somewhere in the desert, hidden where only he knew to look, $50,000 in stolen government gold waited like a promise of freedom or a death sentence for them all. The question was, which would it prove to be? Dawn came to Dustrock like a red wound across the horizon, painting the desert sky. The color of spilled blood. Clara hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep with Jake sitting by the window, cleaning his guns in the gray pre-dawn light while Tommy curled against her side, finally exhausted enough to find peace in dreams. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the boy's soft breathing. Jake's hands never paused in their methodical work, oil and cloth moving over blued steel with the practiced ease of a man who'd kept himself alive with these weapons for too many years. "Yes, I do. The gold ain't worth dying for. But you and Tommy." He looked up then, his winter sage eyes catching the first light through the dusty window. "That's different." Clara felt her heart clench like a fist around his words. This man who'd appeared in her life like something out of a fever dream, who'd claimed her with a lie and protected her with the truth, was willing to throw his life away for people he barely knew. What? The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why us? Why me?" Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough as sandpaper on pine. "You ever have something so bad happen to you that it changes who you are? Makes you into someone you don't recognize when you look in the mirror?" Clara thought of Samuel's gambling, the debts that had driven them from town to town, the night she'd found him face down in an alley with a bullet in his back over a card game gone wrong. The months since, struggling to keep Tommy fed while the world tried to grind them both to dust. Yes, 3 years ago, I rode with good men. Charlie Preston, Tom Mitchell, a few others. We weren't saints, but we had rules. No killing unless someone was trying to kill us first. No hurting women or children. Take what we needed, not everything we could carry. Jake's hands stilled on the gun. Then Vance came along with his grand plans and his easy money, and I let myself get swept up in it. Outside, Clara could hear horses being saddled, the low voices of Murdoch's men preparing for the ride to Silver Creek. Death coming closer with every passing minute. The Esperanza job was supposed to be simple, Jake continued. Hit a government supply train, take the gold, disappear into Mexico until things cooled down. But when we got there, his jaw tightened. Wasn't just soldiers guarding that train. There were families aboard, wives and children of the officers, heading to the fort for a wedding. Clara felt her stomach twist. She could see where this was heading, could read the guilt carved into every line of Jake's face. Vance didn't care. Said civilians made better hostages, easier to control. When I tried to call it off, he pulled a gun on me. Said I could follow orders or follow Charlie and Tom to hell. Jake's voice dropped to barely a whisper. So I ran, left my friends to face whatever came next, and I ran like a coward. You're not a coward. The words came out fierce, surprising them both. A coward wouldn't have stepped in to save me yesterday. Wouldn't be sitting here ready to risk everything for strangers. Jake's smile was bitter as wormwood. Maybe, or maybe I'm just trying to buy my way out of hell one good deed at a time. A sharp knock on the door cut through the morning quiet. Silas Crane's voice followed, rough with anticipation. Time to ride, Jake. Mr. Murdoch's waiting. Jake rose, sliding his guns into their holsters with fluid grace. He moved like a man going to his own execution, resigned and ready. But as he reached for the door handle, Clara found herself on her feet, her hand closing over his wrist. "The gold," she said urgently. "Where is it really?" For a moment, she thought he wouldn't tell her. Then his free hand reached into his vest, withdrawing a folded piece of paper worn soft with handling. "Devil's Canyon, about 10 miles north of here. There's a cave hidden behind a waterfall, dry now, this time of year. Gold's buried under a pile of rocks at the back." He pressed the paper into her hands, a crude map drawn in pencil, showing landmarks and distances. "If something happens to me, take Tommy and go. There's enough there to start over anywhere you want. Mexico, California, maybe even back east where no one knows your name. Jake, promise me." His grip tightened on her wrist, urgent now. "Promise me you'll run if this goes bad. Don't try to be a hero. Just take the boy and go." Before she could answer, the door burst open. Crane stood there with 2 other men, all armed and impatient. "Let's go, Romeo. Time for your last dance." Jake squeezed her hand once, then stepped into the hallway. Clara watched him walk away, his back straight and his head high, looking every inch the gunfighter he'd once been. The sound of his spurs on the wooden floor faded like a funeral dirge. She was still standing there, clutching the map, when Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. The older woman's face was tight with worry and something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. They're gone, she said softly. Rode out heading north about 10 minutes ago. Clara nodded numbly. North toward Silver Creek, toward whatever trap Murdoch had laid for Jake. Toward what might be the last job Jake Dalton ever pulled. Mrs. Patterson, I need a favor. The boarding house keeper wrung her hands. Child, I can't get mixed up in this. Any more than I already am. Mr. Murdoch made it very clear what would happen if, not that kind of favor. Clara's mind was racing, pieces of a desperate plan falling into place like cards in a poker hand. I need you to watch Tommy for a few hours. Keep him safe, keep him hidden. Can you do that? Mrs. Patterson looked at the sleeping boy, her expression softening. Where are you going? To keep a promise. 3 hours later, Clara sat her borrowed horse on the rim of Devil's Canyon. The map spread across her saddle horn as she studied the terrain below. The canyon was a gash in the red earth, carved by centuries of flash floods and lined with twisted juniper and sage. At its bottom, she could see the dry bed of what had once been a rushing stream, now nothing but scattered rocks and alkali dust. Finding the cave had been easier than she'd expected, a dark mouth in the canyon wall, partially hidden by a curtain of dead vines where water had once cascaded down the stone. The gold was exactly where Jake had said it would be, $50,000 in government coins wrapped in oiled canvas and buried under a cairn of carefully placed rocks. But Clara hadn't come here for the gold that she'd come because she'd seen something in Jake's eyes when he'd talked about leaving his friends behind, something that told her he couldn't live with being a coward twice. He was planning something beyond just robbing a bank for Vance Murdoch. Something that would probably get him killed. The sun was climbing toward its zenith when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon, riders coming fast from the direction of Silver Creek. Too many riders, moving too fast, with too much urgency for a successful bank robbery. Something had gone wrong. Clara counted 7 horses as they approached the canyon, recognizing Murdoch's distinctive gray stallion in the lead. They were pushing their mounts hard, lather white on the animals' necks and flanks. Behind them, barely visible against the heat shimmer, came another dust cloud. Pursuit. She scrambled down from her horse, leading it into the concealment of the junipers as the riders thundered past without seeing her. From her hiding place, she could hear fragments of angry conversation carried on the desert wind. Told you he couldn't be trusted, shot 3 of my men before. Find that gold or I'll skin you alive, Jake. They were talking about Jake, and from the sound of it, he'd turned on them during the robbery. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to piece together what had happened. Had he warned the bank? Turned the job into a trap? The second group of riders appeared. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's posse, she realized, recognizing the badges glinting in the sunlight. They were tracking Murdoch's gang, following the clear trail left by hard-ridden horses across the desert hardpan. And somewhere between the two groups, Clara realized with growing dread, Jake was either dead or dying. She was still crouched in the brush, trying to decide what to do next, when she heard it, the soft scuff of a boot on stone behind her. Clara spun, her hand going instinctively to the gun Jake had given her the night before. Easy there, darling. It's just me. Jake stepped out from behind a boulder, and Clara's relief was so overwhelming she nearly fell to her knees. He was alive, but barely, blood seeping through a torn shirt sleeve, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. You're hurt. Been better. He managed a weak smile. What are you doing here, Clara? I told you to run. I don't take orders from outlaws, she said, surprising herself with the tartness in her voice. What happened at Silver Creek? Jake's expression darkened. Vance set me up. Bank was expecting us. Had a dozen armed guards instead of the usual 2. Soon as we rode up, they opened fire. He leaned heavily against the boulder, favoring his wounded arm. Charlie Preston and Tom Mitchell were there. Clara. Vance had been keeping them alive all this time, using them as bait. Clara felt the pieces clicking into place. He wanted you to see them die. Final punishment for betraying him 3 years ago. Make me watch my friends get cut down, then put a bullet in me for good measure. Jake's smile was sharp as broken glass. Problem was, he underestimated how much fight the old gang had left. They're alive. Last I saw, Charlie was making Vance's boys dance with a scattergun while Tom cleared out the bank's safe. Figured if we were going to die anyway, might as well make it expensive for everyone involved. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. There was something beautifully mad about the whole situation. Outlaws and lawmen and stolen gold, all swirling around them like a dust devil in the desert heat. So what now? She asked. Jake looked toward the cave where the gold waited, then back at her face. When he spoke, his voice was steady as bedrock. Now we finish this, one way or another. But even as he said it, Clara could hear the sound that made her blood run cold. More riders approaching, coming fast and hard from 3 different directions. They were surrounded, trapped in the canyon with nowhere to run and death closing in from all sides. The first shots came from the canyon rim, rifle bullets whining off the rocks around them like angry hornets. Clara pressed herself against the stone wall beside Jake, her heart hammering as chips of red sandstone showered down on their heads. "How many?" she gasped, checking the load in her revolver with hands that only trembled a little. "Too many." Jake peered around the boulder, his own gun steady despite the blood loss weakening his shooting arm. Murdoch's got the high ground to the south, sheriff's posse coming up the main trail from the east. Nowhere to run except deeper into the canyon. What about the gold? Jake's laugh was rough as desert wind. What about it? Can't spend it if we're dead. Another volley of shots rang out, this time from a different direction. Clara heard men shouting, the sound echoing off the canyon walls until it was impossible to tell how many voices there were or where they were coming from. Fear and gunpowder smoke filled the air like a poisonous fog. "Jake!" Murdoch's voice boomed across the canyon, amplified by the stone walls. "I know you're down there. Send up the woman with the location of my gold, and I might let you die quick." "Go to hell, Vance." Jake called back, then immediately rolled away from his position as bullets chewed up the rock where he'd been crouched. Clara found herself thinking of Tommy, safe in Mrs. Patterson's care back in Dust Rock, and felt a fierce surge of determination. Her boy was going to grow up free of this violence, this endless cycle of men hurting each other over money and pride. She was going to make sure of it. "The cave," she said suddenly. "Is there another way out?" Jake shook his head. "Dead end. That's why it was such a good hiding place. But caves have back chambers sometimes, don't they? Places where the water carved deeper." Jake's eyes sharpened. "Maybe. Never explored it that far back." He gestured toward the dark mouth in the canyon wall, maybe 50 yards away across open ground. Be suicide trying to reach it now, though. Clara studied the terrain between their position and the cave, calculating angles and cover. The shooting had died down for the moment, both sides conserving ammunition, waiting for a clear shot. In the sudden quiet, she could hear something else, the distant rumble of thunder from the mountains to the west. "Storm coming," she murmured. Jake followed her gaze to the darkening sky. Flash flood weather. This canyon fills up fast when the rains hit the high country. The pieces of a desperate plan began forming in Clara's mind. Dangerous, probably suicidal, but better than waiting here to be picked off like sitting ducks. "I'm going for the cave." "Clara, no. You said it yourself. We can't fight our way out, and we can't stay here." She checked her gun again, then looked into his eyes. "But if there's another way through that cave, if we can get to the other side of the canyon, it's too far, too much open ground. Not if we wait for the right moment." Clara pointed toward the western rim of the canyon, where storm clouds were building into towering thunderheads. "When that lightning starts, everyone's going to be half-blind for a few seconds. That's when we move." Jake stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something change in his expression, the look of a man realizing he wasn't the only one with courage in this partnership. "All right," he said quietly, "but we go together. I'm not losing you now." The storm hit with the sudden violence that only desert weather could bring. One moment the sky was merely threatening. The next it opened up like the gates of heaven had burst, sending walls of rain down into the canyon. Lightning split the air with blue-white fire, thunder crashing so close it seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. "Now!" Jake shouted over the din. They ran. Clara had never moved so fast in her life, her boots slipping on the suddenly slick rock as bullets sang past them through the rain. Jake stayed beside her despite his wounded arm, returning fire toward the canyon rim when he could spare a moment from running. The cave mouth loomed ahead, dark and welcoming as a grave. They tumbled inside just as another lightning bolt illuminated the canyon, showing them glimpses of men scrambling for cover on the rim above. The sudden silence inside the cave was deafening. After the storm's fury, "Keep moving," Jake gasped, reloading his gun by feel in the darkness. "They'll be coming down after us soon as the worst of this passes." Clara felt her way deeper into the cave, one hand trailing along the rough stone wall, the other gripping her revolver. The air grew cooler as they moved away from the entrance, heavy with the smell of ancient water and limestone. Behind them, she could hear the echo of voices, Murdoch's men gathering at the cave mouth. "Light," Jake whispered. "Need to see where we're going." Clara fumbled in her coat pocket, finding the matches she'd brought from the boarding house. The small flame seemed brilliant after the darkness, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. What she saw made her heart leap with hope. The cave didn't end. It curved away into the darkness, following what had once been an underground stream bed. And there, carved into the rock by countless years of flowing water, was a passage barely wide enough for one person. "It goes through," she breathed. "Jake, it goes all the way through to the other side." They could hear boots on stone now, men entering the cave behind them. Jake grabbed the oiled canvas bundle containing the gold, slinging it over his shoulder despite his wounded arm. "Go," he said. "I'll be right behind you." The passage was a nightmare of tight spaces and sharp rock, barely wide enough for Clara's shoulders in some places. She could hear Jake behind her, his breathing harsh with pain, but he kept moving. The sound of pursuit grew fainter as they worked their way through the heart of the canyon, following the ancient watercourse toward whatever waited on the other side. When they finally emerged, gasping and scraped raw by the rock, they found themselves in a hidden box canyon she hadn't even known existed. The storm was passing, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of sage and wet earth. And there, standing in a shaft of golden sunlight that broke through the departing clouds, were two men Clara recognized from Jake's descriptions: Charlie Preston and Tom Mitchell, alive and grinning despite their torn clothes and powder-burned faces. Well, Charlie said, his scattergun cradled easy in his arms. "Look what the cat dragged in." "Jake, you son of a bitch," Tom added with genuine warmth. "Thought for sure Vance had put you under." "Not yet." Jake set down the canvas bundle, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. "Though he's sure trying." "Who's the lady?" Charlie asked, tipping his hat to Clara with old-fashioned courtesy. "Clara Dalton," Jake said, and something in the way he said it made her heart skip. Not Clara Thornfield. Not even Clara Thornfield who's pretending to be Clara Dalton. Just Clara Dalton, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Well, Mrs. Dalton," Tom said with a grin, "your husband here just cost Vance Murdoch about $50,000 in government gold and made him look like a fool in front of half the territorial authority. Figured we owed him that much for leaving us behind 3 years ago." "You cleaned out the bank?" Clara asked. "Every last coin," Charlie confirmed. "Vance was so busy setting his trap for Jake, he forgot we might have our own ideas about how this should play out." From somewhere beyond the passage, they could hear Murdoch's voice echoing off the cave walls, cursing his men for losing the trail. But the sound was growing fainter. They were searching in the wrong direction, assuming their quarry had gone deeper into the dead-end cave instead of finding the hidden passage. "So what now?" Clara asked. Jake looked at the canvas bundle, then at his old friends, then finally at her. "Now we disappear. All of us. There's enough gold here to buy new lives, new names, clean slates wherever we want to start over." "Mexico's nice this time of year," Tom suggested. "California's got opportunities for men willing to work hard," Charlie added, but Clara found herself thinking of something else entirely. "What about Tommy?" Jake's expression softened. "We go back for him, of course. Tonight, when things settle down. Mrs. Patterson will keep him safe until then. And after that." Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the golden afternoon light. "After that, we find out if you really want to be Clara Dalton. Not because you have to be, but because you choose to be." Clara looked at this man who'd saved her from a whipping post, protected her from his enemies, and trusted her with his life and the lives of his friends. This man who'd given up everything, his past, his sins, even his carefully hoarded gold, to keep her and Tommy safe. "I choose," she said simply. 6 months later, Clara stood in the doorway of a small house overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching Jake teach Tommy how to skip stones across the waves. The California sun was warm on her face, and in the garden, beside the house, the roses she'd planted were finally beginning to bloom, red as desert sunsets, beautiful as hope renewed that they'd kept their promise. All of them. Charlie and Tom had bought a small ranch in the hills inland, where they raised horses and told no one about their past. The gold had been quietly exchanged for honest money through a banker in San Francisco who asked no questions and kept no records. And Clara Dalton, really and truly Clara Dalton now, with a marriage certificate that wouldn't crumble under scrutiny, had found something she'd never expected to have again: a future. "Mama," Tommy called from the beach. "Did you see? I got it to skip 4 times." "I saw, sweetheart," she called back, and caught Jake's eye as he turned to smile at her. In that smile, she saw everything they'd built together. Love that had grown from necessity into something deeper than desire. A family forged in fire and tempered by choice. The desert had taught them both that sometimes the most beautiful things bloom in the harshest places. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those blooms last forever. Like the desert roses that bloom after the rain, love finds a way to flourish even in the most barren ground. Subscribe to hear more tales of hearts that refuse to surrender to the wilderness. Drop a comment below and let us know, where in this wide world are you watching from today?